Right, welcome to this week's edition of the Old Parachute Podcast. And I'm joined today, all the way from Ibiza, former Royal Navy, former firefighter, and prolific event manager, Danny Whittle. How you doing, pal? All right?
Yeah, very good, mate. Thank you. Very good. Yeah. It's nice and sunny here in Ibiza.
Yeah, I know. We were just talking then before we come on air, and it's like -4 here in Nottingham, and up in Scotland it's like -15. It's horrendously cold and horrible. So I'm not jealous of you in Ibiza at all, mate. Not at all.
No, I can imagine.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come on the podcast. I'm sure you're busy with bits and bobs, but I always appreciate when guests make a time to come on. As we talked about, the reason one of the goals behind the podcast is to kind of raise a bit of a mental awareness for emergency services, for former veterans, get people talking, and just kind of share experiences, across the board. So, yeah, what I like to do with all the podcasts is start off at the beginning, where you grew up. And ultimately, what led you down the path into the Navy and then on to the fire service and beyond? So, yeah, over to you, pal.
Yeah, you know what? I grew up in Stoke-on-Trent. I was born in 62. The 60s in Stoke-on-Trent area was very industrial. Everybody had a job. You either worked down the coal mines, you work on the pottery industry, you worked in Shelton Bar, which is the steel works. And it was a hard working community, and then we all know sort of what happened in the 70s, and I'm not blaming, I'm not getting political here by any means at all. Thatcher was in power. The problem is, in the end, it's a world economy and people want cheaper bills. So if you want cheap electricity, well, then the power station is going to buy coal from Poland. They're not going to buy it from somewhere in the UK that's 3 times the price. So the market fell out of British industry basically because again it was supply and demand. Everybody wants cheap electricity, so they had to close the coal mines. People lost their jobs. Things like the pottery industry that Stoke was always famous for moved to China. Again, people wanted cheaper stuff, so they made it elsewhere. So Stoke then turned into a very sad place that was full of very hard-working, very loyal, funny people who suddenly found themselves living in a city that had no work. These people had lived all their lives. If your dad worked down the coal mine, you got a job. If your dad worked on the steelworks, you got a job. So, and that's what really very much like Nottingham and Sheffield. They're all ex-mining towns and so on. And we all went down that road. So by the time I got to leaving school in '79, I thought, okay, I want to go and I need to get out of here because I don't want to study like crazy and then end up not getting a job in any way. And my dad was ex-army, but at the time the troubles in Northern Ireland were like pretty peaking at that time, the late '70s. It was kicking right off. And I thought, well, I don't really want a bit of that. And, RAF, okay, really don't really do much. Navy, I want to see the world. Let me join the Navy. I'm going to go to the Navy. So I went up to the recruiting office and I did my test up there. And they said, I went to be a ship electrician. And when I did my test, they said, oh, you can work on, you can be in the Fleet Air Arm. Your test results as such, you can be in the Fleet Air Arm. And I was like, no, I want to be in the Navy. They goes, well, that kind of is the Navy. It's just that it's the air wing of the Navy. So you'll be working on helicopters and Harrier jets and, Sea Kings, so on. You'll be more likely based on aircraft carriers or ships that carry their own helicopter. And you'll be working on the aircraft side of things more than the actual ship side. And I thought, you know what? I like that. I like the sound of that. I'm going to kill two birds with one stone here. I get to be on a big warship, but I get to work on jets and on helicopters. And that's what I did. It was really me getting out of an environment that I thought I was never going to be happy in. I needed to find my own way. And by joining the military, I met some amazing friends. You know yourself, the mates for life. I still hang around with mates that we made friends in 1979 and we still go sailing together. And we did our sailing license together in Denia and so on. So, that's why it was important to me to get away from Stoke. And as much as I love Stoke, it's still my hometown. I still support Stoke City. All my mates, a load of my mates come over to Ibiza. 3 or 4 times a year, and they're all Stokies. But I had to get out. That time in the end of the 70s, early 80s was not a great time. And even now, Stoke's only really coming out of that dip. It's only coming out in the last sort of 5 years. It's starting to come back out because of technology, and there's a huge workforce there that's reasonable money. You know, it's cheaper than setting up a business in London or a big warehouse or something like that. And there's a big hard working population there ready to work. You know, so thank God, I think we've turned the corner, but it's taken about 40 years to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything suddenly went from a bustling mining town where the pubs were full to like ghost towns, sort of almost
Absolutely.
overnight when they shut. So obviously the options for you there were kind of limited. So the military was like, I think a lot of people did, and you know, you probably had a big surge of people joining the military, coinciding with the closing of the mines and the pits, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was an escape. It was like, you know, and a lot of people like that. You're either really good at sports or something, or you join the military. You know, that's it, you get out really. Certainly in them times, and anyway, and you know, it's so different now. It's like when I joined the military, you know, the only way you could call home was in a phone box. You know, and now everybody's got mobile phones. They're emailing. You know, even in the mid-Atlantic now, they're sending emails. You know, via satellite. We couldn't do any of that. When we went to sea for 3 months, that was it for 3 months. You didn't really communicate at
Yeah,
all with home. You get the odd phone call if you're lucky, and the satellite call, you know?
the old
Yeah.
bluey letters as well. Did you get them as well? You used
Oh,
to
yeah,
send
yeah.
the blueies and stuff like that.
They used
Well,
to fold up.
yeah, yeah, the fold up, that was your
Yeah.
means of communication. Funny you should mention, I've just talked to a Royal Marine and a former Irish Guard. They're actually rowing the Atlantic, and their internet, because of Starlink, was absolutely bang on from the middle of the Atlantic on a little rowing boat. So,
There you
you know,
go.
technology is absolutely insane, isn't it? And it's like I'm speaking to you. You might as well be next door to me. Um,
Absolutely.
so it's a good thing. But yeah, obviously joining the military, I would imagine it would have been different. I mean, every generation says that the kind of military was different in their day. I like to think the standards are still the same, but I probably would argue that it's become a bit softer now. I joined in the late 90s. I like to think it was probably still quite tough. Look, the world's changed and things change and things move on, and that's just the way it goes, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
where did you do your basic training then?
So I did basic training at HMS Raleigh. I still remember to this day, November the 27th, 1979, my mum crying on Stoke Station platform, waving me off. My mum, my sister, and my dad. You know, I remember it perfectly. And it's funny because I went back to Stoke not so long ago and I stood on that very platform and I looked back and it was like going back in time to 1979. You know, it was like the same platform. I had all these images of us, you know, what was going on. And yeah, so I went to Raleigh. I did my basic training there. You know the basic training, 6 to 8 weeks or whatever. And because I went at the end of November, we were breaking ice off the salt course, and oh my God, freezing cold. You know, a lot of messing about, a lot of, you know, getting caught, pillar fights and God knows what else, and running around the parade ground in just your pants and boots with your mattress on your head. And like you said, I mean, a bit tougher. I mean, I don't think they do that stuff anymore. I think the military is probably as professional and maybe even more professional to a degree, but it's definitely softer. You know, they don't get away with the stuff they used to get away with in our time. That was certainly my time. And I think even in the 90s was stuff. I mean, the 90s right now is 30 years ago, right? 25,
I know,
30 years.
don't remind me.
No, no, tell me about it. But yeah, it's definitely, I think it's definitely softer, you know, obviously still very professional. And, you know, I mean, the big difference as well when I was in there, women weren't allowed on board ship when I was there. They weren't allowed on front line and they weren't allowed on board ship at all. So, you know, and now you've got women on board ships. But yeah, and then after we did the basic training, I went over to HMS Daedalus, which is an air station college in Leon Solent near Portsmouth, where we and then trained to be a weapons technician on aircraft and small arms. And then from there, I joined an air station in Portland down by Weymouth for about 6 months just to do frontline stuff. And then went straight on HMS Hermes, which was the flagship in the Falklands. Uh, yeah, and then I ended up in the Falklands War in 82. We did the full, you know, the full 5, 6 months there. Uh, so it was strange. I joined the Navy, so I didn't have to go to Northern Ireland and ended up in the Falklands. So,
Yeah.
and then when we got back, uh, we thought everything was all good, and then about 6 months later, they shipped us off to Beirut to evacuate British citizens because they remembered they drove that truck bomb into the American embassy and killed 300 Marines. So we
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
like bouncing them off the ship over to Cyprus to evacuate British citizens. So, and it was then not far after that where I decided, okay, I've done 6 years here. I've had enough. I've seen the world, a couple of scraps and so on. And I got out and then had an option really of joining the police or the fire brigade. The fire brigade really sort of sung to me. It felt like something I could really get my teeth into more than the police. The police felt complicated to me. I think it takes a special person to be a copper. There's a lot of consideration there, and I'm probably too easygoing, and I'd just let everybody off, I think. So, I think being a fireman for me, and I think seeing what I saw down south, seeing some of the injuries and going to action station 3, 4 times a day, things like St Galahad happening and Sheffield. And I mean, I think we lost about 7 ships. We lost a huge amount of men. I think more men than in Afghanistan in 20 years, in literally 6 months. So, and we were hot bunking with 22 SAS platoon. We were working with a lot with the Royal Marines, and these guys, we lost 18 SAS in one night in a helicopter crash. I think it's the
Yeah.
worst loss of life in the regiment ever in one go like that since the Second World War. And then I just thought, you know what? Talking about mental health. So I thought going into the fire brigade would be more help to me than going into. I mean, I actually went to the job centre, and when I'd left the fire brigade, because after 10 years, nearly 11 years fighting fires, I had this big problem in my right eye called corneal ulcers, and it kept reoccurring. And they then said, "Listen, we think it's when you're going in with the smoke and you're rubbing your eyes, and we think it's bringing it on, and all the rest of it. You've got to go." And I remember going to the job centre and saying, she said, "Oh, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, look, I just spent 6 years on an aircraft carrier and over 10 years fighting fires. What do you think I want to do? Tell me a job that's going to give me that adrenaline, that rush, that vibe, that feeling." And she said, "You know what? Just go away for 6 months and we'll send you a check. You don't have to sign on. And after 6 months, when you've got your head round it, come back and see us and we'll see what we can do. And we'll take you from there." And it was then from that point, a friend of mine owned a big touring promotions company for music. And he approached me and said, "Do you want to come and work with us and do logistics on our events?" And I said, "Well, is it exciting?" He said, "Well, listen, if we do a festival for 20,000 people and we have to open at midday on Saturday, if you're not ready, there's 20,000 people outside ready to kick your head in, so you better be ready." I thought, okay, that sounds like something I could get my teeth into. And then I did that, and I think I've now been doing that for about 25 years, nearly 30 years. I mean, I did some events that I've done, 40,000 people, Homelands festivals in Scotland, England, Ireland. I did the Bondi Beach for the Millennium for 20,000 people with Carl Cox. I've done festivals all over the place. I ran PACHA nightclub here in Ibiza for 13 years, doing 5,000 people a night for 140 nights in a row every summer, and done lots of events. And what I've seen by doing that is a lot of people having a really good time. I think the transition from military, seeing some horrors, fire brigade, seeing some horrors, but at the same time helping a lot of people and really, going out your way to help people because it's like that's what you do, that's your job, and then getting into something that's putting smiles on faces. I really felt that transition helped me with regards to any potential of PTSD. It's almost like that evolution took my mind off, stopped me from looking backwards, which I think is probably one of the main reasons for PTSD, is that some guys can't stop thinking about what happened. and they can't let it go, they dwell on it. And sometimes when they dwell on it, I don't know this because I don't suffer with it myself, but from the guys I work with, and I sponsor a charity called Adaptive Grand Slam (AGS), which is a load of wounded veterans. I bring them over to Ibiza, and they climb Everest. They go to the North Pole. I mean, they do insane things. One of them's got no legs, another one's got one leg, one's got an arm missing. You know, they've had bits blown off them all over Afghanistan and Iraq. And when I talk to them about that, you know, most of them don't suffer with it, but they do tell me that the guys that do tend to be, they can't let go of the past. You know, they can't let go of
Yeah.
that issue, that thing. And so I do think that my evolution in my working life has really helped me to do that. I think becoming a fireman, you know, when you're on a fire, you're fighting a fire, or you're pulling somebody out of a bedroom, smoke-filled bedroom, or whatever. You're not thinking about what you did 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. You're in the moment, you know, completely. Or driving a fire engine, even. You know, as you know, if you're driving, you're on it. You're driving a fire engine. And I think that really helped. And then I think getting into the entertainment business again, I think was a real you know, another evolution that made me think, okay, I get out of bed in the morning and my entire aim is to put smiles on faces, which is a really nice feeling as well, you know.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I just want to touch on, I'll go back to the fire service in a second, but that adaptive Grand Slam, I had a guy on the podcast from Para, Terry Byrne, that lost a leg in Afghanistan. And
Okay.
he's done some really, really good stuff. So that you're a big supporter and kind of sponsor of that is amazing, because, you know, that these guys have suddenly gone from sort of life-changing injuries to then having an absolute amazing purpose, whether it be climbing Everest. And a lot of them do say that they probably wouldn't have done half the stuff, weirdly, if they hadn't have got injured. And that's a weird way of looking at things, isn't it, as well?
Oh, 100%, mate. I mean, I bring 10 of them over every year. I also own a music conference. It's like a big music conference I do in Ibiza at the end of April. It's like 2,500, 3,000 delegates from all over the world. They fly in to look at music technology, marketing, management, promotion, anything to do with music, the music industry. And I bring these 10 guys over, and they come over, and while they're here, they go sort of windsurfing and electric mountain biking and hiking and all these things. They come and stay at the hotel with us. They go to all the parties with us. I do a big event up in the castle. And they become really, really good friends, you know. And the main guy, Martin, who's the captain, he got shot in the shoulder with a 50 cal, virtually blew his arm off. They managed to stitch it back on. You know, his response to the doctor, said, listen, we can take it off or we can sew it on, but you won't have much use. And he said, well, if I can hold a beer and wank, I'll stitch it back on. I
That's
thought, yeah,
typical
there you go.
sporting humour, isn't it? That's
There
sporting
you go.
humour all over, isn't it?
Absolutely
Um,
that, yeah.
yeah, and it's good that, you know, these guys are really upbeat, and they're, like I say, they go and then push themselves. And like I say, you know, hats off to you for bringing them over and, you know, getting them involved with stuff. I think that's absolutely brilliant, pal. Going back to the fire service. So where did you serve in the fire service? Which service? Which
I
brigade?
was in Staffordshire, so next door to
Right.
you. I think you were
Yeah,
Nottinghamshire, no? So you were
that's right. Yeah.
Nottingham, Derbyshire, Staffordshire. Yeah, I was in Staffordshire. I was on, my main station was a station called Longton. Uh, Lots of M6 call outs, which, as you know, are very rarely very nice, especially in winter and fog, you know, and 30 car pile-ups and God knows what else. You know what they're like. And, you know, again, I think back in the 80s, I joined there in 83, 84. You know, in the 80s, people didn't really have smoke alarms. People were still smoking in bed a lot. They were still, you know, still getting drunk and smoking in bed. They were leaving chip pan fires on. And, you know, it seemed to, I saw over my 11 years, if you like, I saw people become more aware of the risks of fire. At the beginning, it did feel like, well, certainly on the big council estates, we've got a big council estate called Bentley in Stoke where I live. But at the time, well, it was the biggest council estate in Europe. And, you know, you can imagine, I mean, they were taking power from the street lamps outside and putting it into the house to get free power. And, you know, there were certain parts of this estate where they wouldn't even go and collect the rent. They just wrote it off. It's, you know, yeah. So Longton was my main station. And then I also worked at Hanley Station and a few others. Sometimes when a guy didn't show up, they'll send you out to another station to cover for somebody or whatever. I don't know if they still do that now, but they did in my
Yeah,
time.
detachments. Yeah, you go out and
Detachment,
you do
yeah,
detachments. Yeah.
exactly that, yeah.
Yeah, you tend to get all over the county with detached. Certainly, when you're like a trainee or probationer, they tend to send you out to get your face out there and get to know people.
Yeah,
So
yeah, totally.
yeah. I've worked at a lot of stations all over Nottinghamshire and stuff like that. But I suppose, obviously, when you look at your time in the fire service, you probably very rarely wore, be it you certainly didn't wear breathing apparatus for car fires back then, did you? That
No,
was like a thing. And also with the cars, you look at the safety features in cars. And I remember as a kid growing up in the 80s, there weren't seatbelts in the back. And it wasn't like a law sort of, a rule to wear a seatbelt. If the car had them, you put them on. If it didn't, you didn't bother. So that
absolutely not.
so a lot has changed from then, as in safety with cars, smoke alarms, everything you've just said, which means there's for a good reason there's lower calls now. We don't get nowhere near the amount of calls that the guys did in the 80s and 90s and
We,
stuff
we,
because of
we
what
were
we see.
doing about 1,200 a year.
Okay, well that's probably what my station averages now. I'm a one pump station in the north
Okay.
of Nottinghamshire, and that's probably what we kind of average. And we're lucky at our station that we are. There are a lot of stations in the city that we call them. They turn off the fire alarms. That's what they do. They go to AFAs all the time.
Yeah,
Whereas if we get jobs, they tend to be working jobs.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it
No,
is for the
we did.
people that for the people that don't have never served in the fire service. The buzz of going out, turning out that fire, turning out the station on blue lights is like something. Obviously, I worked in Iraq and I kind of been involved in quite a lot of incidents over there with IEDs and stuff. But that's the only thing I can find that's come close to that sort of buzz, and it's weird, isn't it? Or going into a house fire that's fully
Absolutely.
engulfed, you know. Um,
100%. Or in a big factory where you have to go on guidelines, and without that guideline, you'd be lost. I mean, as you know, the smoke is like that. When they show it on the TV, it's never anything like it really is it? It's
no, never.
you watch any of the movies, and they can see everything, and in a real fight, you can put your hand there and you don't really see it. It's insane. But it's funny. When I've been in about 2 years, the chief fire officer came to our station and said, give us his talk or whatever. And he goes, anyway, any questions? And I went, yeah, boss, can I drive? Anyway, the next week he put me on a driving course. And because I wanted the buzz of driving a fire engine. And all my mates are looking at me, goes, how come you get to drive? You only been in 2 years. I said, well, I just asked him. And he said, yeah. So that was it. And I love
Yeah,
driving. I must admit, I loved it.
yeah, I couldn't wait to start driving. I was pretty much the similar because I was a little bit older. I was about 33 when I joined the fire service, so I was a bit like, I'd been around, I'd done a bit, and I come straight out of probation and went straight on my driving. And I always, as a kid, wanted to drive a Dennis, and there
Yeah,
was
yeah.
maybe the odd spare truck that was a Dennis, but we'd moved on to the Scania trucks.
Standards, yeah.
And luckily for me, there was no other spares. There was one Dennis, and we ended up with it at Mansfield. And I ended up for 6 months cutting around Nottinghamshire in a Dennis, and I was chuffed to bits because they're like go
Dennis.
karts.
Yeah, we had all Dennis. All of our trucks were Dennis at the time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Great. But
awesome
I
stuff.
remember,
Awesome.
we had one of the old tenders was a manual gearbox, 6 speed, you had to double the clutch. Proper old thing. The main tender, with the 135 ladder was a proper, like, brand new Dennis. It was amazing. But the second one, which was manned by retained firemen, well, it looked like something off bloody Camberwick Green. I mean, it was, it's terrible.
We have an appliance where I'm at now, and it's quite old. I think it's like a W reg or something. So yeah, no, not W. I think it's like a 97 sort
Yeah,
of reg, and it's still an operational appliance. It's an aerial ladder platform and help. And someone pulled over quite recently, and a member of public went, "Oh, you coming back from a show?" He was like, "No, it's a frontline appliance." So it's one of them, It's but yeah, I mean, it sounds like you had a cracking time in the fire service. The camaraderie, the kind of again, I liken it to the military.
very
The
much.
friends you meet in the fire service. You socialise with them out. It's not
Yeah.
just a team of people you work with; they're almost like a family, aren't they?
Well, we had a bar at our fire station. I mean, you could
That's
drink.
before my time. That's way
Mate,
before my
we,
time.
we had a bar. We used to cook our own food. In the daytime we had a girl in that was the chef. But at night, on nights, we would take it in turns cooking dinner for the crew, for everybody. And we slept. I mean, you still have beds, right? On your night shift. You don't know. No, we had
No,
beds.
gone now.
So we used to do nine in the morning till 6 in the evening, and then 6 in the evening till 9 in the morning. So, and it was 2 days, 2 nights, 4 days off,
So
basically.
so what happened is they changed the shift. So I do 7-7. So 2 days, 2 nights, but it's 7-7, and that's how come they got round getting rid of the beds. Because obviously, if you go over that 12-hour period, you have to have enforced rest that requires horizontal
Yeah,
platforms or whatever they're called.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I think some services do, but certainly our kind of services got away from that now, and it's just the way that the times change, and things move on.
yeah,
It is what it is. We've all
yeah, yeah,
adapted
totally.
to it.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
still have downtime, but it's not like you're climbing into a bed and stuff. And certainly the bars have gone. I have
yeah,
heard stories from the older generation of the bars, and part of me thinks it's a changing of the times, but also I think for me that's probably a good thing that they went as well
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah. No,
I,
you needed a lot of self-discipline at the end because we served ourselves on night shift. So that our rule was you could have a pint. When you were on nights, when you finished all the drills and the training, you had your dinner. Sort of at 9 o'clock, you could have one pint, and then normally by midnight, everybody went bed. But most nights, you'd be called out. You'd have 2 calls a night, 1 or 2 calls a night. Sometimes, as you can have a call out and be on the way back to the station, and before you can get back to the station, you're sent out on another call straight away. So, it can be all over the place. That's for sure.
that's the
Yeah,
weird thing about the fire service, and I find that the exciting part because you can go in and get 1 or 2 calls, or you can be in and out all night, and you just never know, do you? And every job's different,
sure.
So,
And you can got one call and be on that for 7 hours. One big
absolutely, yeah.
factory fire or whatever. So it's or big car crash on the motorway or something. For sure. Yeah,
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 no,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So obviously you made the decision. What was the kind of reasoning? Because again, a lot of people, it's becoming quite apparent now that people, it's not so uh, an unusual thing for someone to leave the fire service after a few years now. Some people come, still a lot of people, it's a career, a massive kind of percentage. But obviously back then, once you were in the fire service, people tended to do their full 30 years, didn't they? So I find it a little bit unusual that you decided to leave. What was the driving force behind
I,
that? You
I
just felt
didn't.
like you had enough?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I had the problem with my eyes.
Oh, of course, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they said you've got to go because the problem is the thing I had, which is called corneal ulcers, they're recurring and they are very much brought on. It's a bit like the cold sores on your lips, but actually in your eye, in the cornea. And so it's a viral thing, but it's brought on by certain atmospheres or certain conditions. And after about 4 or 5 times of these things, they said, listen, you got to go because the problem is your eye can go toxic and then you lose your eye. So you can imagine the local county council having to pay for me losing an eye because, straight away they would have said, well, it's because of the conditions he was working in, blah, blah, blah. So they said, listen, you've got to leave. And, the good thing is I joined my military pension with the fire brigade. So I'd actually done I think collectively almost 17 years. So they give me a little bit of a pension, but I didn't want to go. I mean, I'd have stayed in for 25, no doubt about it, because I'd already done 7. So I only had to do 25 and I'd have been 32-year man and I'd have got a full pension. I had no intention of leaving. And when they told me I got to go, as much as I kind of suspected that this was going to happen because of the problems I was having, it was still a bit of a shock to the system. And again, like I told you when I went up to the job centre, and she was like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, what do you think? It's like an aircraft carrier or driving a fire engine or running into a house fire in BA. I'm not going to work in a shop or in a factory or I would lose my mind. You know what I mean? So, yeah, she was really good. I mean, they were really good. The way they looked after me, to be honest,
That
was very
that's
good.
that's good. That's good, and it's good to see that you kind of having served in the military and been a firefighter, you know, two professions there where you're serving your country and helping other people, you think they would look after you. And I'm not too sure that's the case nowadays. I don't move into politics or anything like that for
Yeah.
obvious reasons. But yeah, it's good that you were looked after. But again, a difficult situation to be in. You know, you've gone in, you've planned to be a career firefighter, and then all of a sudden you're out and you're like, well, what do I do? And that's how I kind of find myself. If I was to leave now after 12 years, I'd be a bit like, well, I'm 45 now. What do I do? So you got speaking to a friend, and the next thing you know, you're out in a beef. Was it literally like that? You literally spoke to
No,
someone and
yeah, well, it was a mate of mine, Jeff Oakes, who run a big company called Renaissance. In fact, they used to have a big club in Nottingham called Renaissance. It was the old
yeah,
opera
yeah.
house. And we used to do events all around there. But yeah, he was doing big festivals, and he just said, you know, he said, "What you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." And he knew I was HGV driver because of the fire brigade and so on. He knew I was very disciplined when it came to getting out of bed in the morning because of ex-military and ex-fireman. And at the time, the music industry, and probably to a degree, still is to a degree, you know, it's a bit cowboy, it's a bit Wild West. You know, certain people get into the industry for different reasons. Some do it because they want to party, you know, but there's still a big job to be done, you know. And so he said, "Well, why don't you do that for us? Why don't you do the logistics, the stage, the lights, the sound?" You know, the security fencing, the this, the that, whatever, whatever makes a festival tick, you do it. And I did, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. You know, very quickly moved on to doing my own events, and then before I know it, I was sent out to Ibiza to you know, run events in clubs here in Ibiza. And then within about 3 years of me coming here, I finally moved here. One of the clubs rung me. I actually did Bondi Beach for the millennium. They'd never done an event there bigger than 800 people. And the cop said to me, you want, you know, I was asking for a license for 15,000 people. They said, well, you know, we do 800 people and it just ends up being a big fight because they were doing rock events there, and it was all bikers and this and that, and you know. And I said, well, my crowd are not. My crowd is electronic music. They're kind of a bit more, you know, peaceful. Anyway, he said, okay. And finally, I got because I was an ex-fireman, I sort of knew their language. So when I sat down with the fire chief and the police chief, you know, they knew I was an ex-fireman. I showed them my ID card and all the rest of it, an ex-fireman. He said, anyway, the Lord Mayor gave me the license for 15,000 people. So I put it on sale in September, $50 a ticket, and 15,000 tickets sold out in 10 days. So then I got back to England at that point, and the guy with the mayor's office called me and said, "Can you come back to Australia? The mayor wants to speak to you." I'm like, "Oh my God, something's gone wrong, whatever." And I fly all the way back there, and I get there, and it says, where have you sold the tickets? And I had a pie chart. I had all the demographics of where things have been sold. And it's 72% were sold outside of Australia. So this is people flying into Australia for the event and for the millennium. And he went, listen, now why don't you do 20,000 people? And I was like, well, hang on. I've just put all the plans in for 15,000. They've all been accepted. You know, it's if you look at the pavilion on Bondi Beach, there's a big piece of grass next to it. He said, if you fence it in and show silent movies, you can have another 5,000 tickets. And I thought,
Loopholes.
let's do that then. I thought it's his office. So yeah, in the end we did 20,000 people. It was amazing. And then I got back to London. I was living in London at the time, like the 4th of January. And I think on the 10th, I got a phone call from the owner of PACHA here, which is like one of the biggest clubs in the world. It's amazing. And he said, Danny, do you want to come out and live in Ibiza and run the club and program every night, you know, the content for every night? And I was like, yeah. So literally within 10 days, I'd moved to Ibiza. He gave me a villa in his grounds and, yeah, it totally looked after me. And that was in January 2000. And I've been here ever since. Yeah,
Wow.
a nice transition.
Yeah, not a bad transition at all. I mean, I'm not like I say that is an amazing story to kind of. But again, that just shows that you kind of what sort of person you are. You were put, you know, in charge of this massive event in Australia. You made it work, and it's if you've got a proven track record of running events and you're doing a good job, and obviously it's good if 72% of the people coming in were tourists. That's massive for Australia, isn't it? Because back then as well, trying to get tourism in and everything else. So that's amazing. So yeah, what was it like? Because I can imagine, again, from my perspective, and probably from a lot of the audience perspective, Ibiza, if you're explaining that you're running nightclubs in Ibiza, people think party, 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 carefree, fun and games. But I can imagine it being a really stressful or it can be stressful if you're planning everything down to the finer details and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is very stressful. There's a huge business behind what we do. Like I said, I own the International Music Summit, and your listeners can have a look online at the website. And it's a very big music conference. It's attended from people all over the world. I mean, electronic music now is a $12 billion a year business. And obviously behind that is a huge amount of business that has to be done correctly, And I mean, you've got DJs now making €500,000 a gig, I mean, when you book a DJ for $500,000 a gig, that night you're taking 1.5 million, 2 million in revenue. So it's become a big thing. The big DJs now are, sitting with some of the biggest and most powerful agencies in the world. Your William Morris Endeavour, Creative Artists, CAA, Vasterman, all these huge agencies that represent the biggest stars on the planet. They also now represent DJs because they're making huge amounts of money. And some of the DJs are making more money than the bands because, if you make £1 million as a band, but there's six of you, it's X amount each. A DJ Calvin Harris can make £1 million in one gig on his own. So there's a huge demand for it. So it has to be done. It has to be run properly. It has to be it has to be done professionally. And you don't want anybody getting hurt. Ultimately, you want it to be run smoothly. People come in, have a great time, and people leave. You don't want people, the wrong things happening. So all of the staff that I work with, our security, they're all highly trained. They all know how to handle somebody. If somebody's drunk or whatever in a bad state, they don't just grab them and throw them out. They take them to the nurse in the room. They make sure they're looked after. They have, as better experience as they can have, and then they're taken away like that. It's not like the old days in nightclubs where the bouncer would just give you a backhander and throw you in the entry outside. All of that stuff's changed completely. It's had to do because it's become uh, definitely a very professional industry now compared to how it used to be, for sure. I mean, and it all started. The electronic music industry was illegal. I mean, it was raves back in the 80s. It was illegal raves in a car park somewhere where you got a text on one of the old Nokia phones and you go and meet there, and that was it. And it was only when the government clamped down on them raves that they had to then move it into nightclubs. That everything changed at that point, and then it had to start to clean up its act with regards to how professional it was run.
Yeah, well, raves and that, it was like abandoned warehouses and underground rave scene was huge coming up through the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I was like sort of as a teenager through the 90s. I wasn't really into raves, but I was aware of them happening, kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
illegal raves and stuff like that. And obviously the kind of ecstasy scene was massive and that around that time as well. And like you say, for that to suddenly crack down on that, like you say, it must have been booming for the nightclub kind of business. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. Well, the nightclubs were suffering back then because everybody was going to the raves. People weren't going to clubs, and like you say, there's the ecstasy. I mean, ecstasy, I think, probably had more to do with stopping football hooliganism than anything else. There was Eve being passed around on football terraces, and it's crazy how from the 70s and 80s there was all that hooliganism going on at football matches. As soon as ecstasies came about, suddenly it died off, and people go, "Oh well, it's about there's more cameras or whatever." And it was like, no, I don't think so. There was more going on there than And a lot of these football fans would meet at like the Hacienda or some of the big clubs in Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, and they actually became mates. So. Yeah, there was a big transition in the late 80s, early 90s. That's for sure. It was, yeah, yeah. It's a different thing, uh, you know, seeing people file into a club than standing on a flight deck watching an Exocet missile fly past you. That's for sure.
Yeah, I bet a whole different world. What altogether? Really, it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's a bit bonkers to kind of go from that to that. I know it was over a period of years, but I bet you
yeah.
kind of stood there at times and thought, how my life's now changed.
Yeah, no, totally. And you know what? I mean, you'll know as well, having been through it yourself, the trench humour. I think you called it the paratrooper, or was it the squaddies humour?
The dark
And
humor, isn't it?
the
And it's the
the
same with
dark
the
humour.
fire service.
No, well, it's same with fire service, and it was same. In the Falklands, and we were coming under attack 3 or 4 times a day, and the amount of times that you end up giggling when you could easily be crying. It's unbelievable. I mean, I remember one time we were loading a depth charge onto a Sea King on Hermes. We came under attack. We went to answer action stations. We went to quarter stand two, missile released and closing. You're just literally waiting for something to hit. And my mate, who actually became a fireman in Derbyshire, Dean Bellingham, was running around in a circle, and I was sitting by this helicopter. I was like, Bedders, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm just running. And I think that, mentally on a ship, it's like, well, where do you run? So
Yeah,
nowhere. There's nowhere to go because the missile could hit anywhere. So I think his brain was saying kind of run, but the other side was going, but where to? So he ended up just doing this big circle. And as soon as he said, I don't know, I'm just running, we both just fell about laughing. I mean, it was absolutely hysterical, really. And there were so many of them occasions. And I think back to that, and I often think I could have just as easily burst into tears, to be honest. It was like proper dark humour.
it is. It is weird, and I think, and I've touched about this because I've had quite a few firefighters on. I've had no end of veterans on, SES veterans, Falklands veterans, the likes of, and I see it as a coping mechanism. And to the outside person, that would probably, especially in the current climate that we live, would probably be deemed defensive or certain things. But I believe it's if they try and get rid of that dark humor, there's a time and a place for it within certainly within the military. It's within teams, and your audience. But if they try and get rid of that, it is a coping mechanism. It's how people deal
100%.
with stress, and how they deal with the things that they've seen and done, and the incidents they've been involved in.
Yeah, 100%, mate. In the end, your brain takes over to a degree. I mean, there is no stopping that. There was no stopping Bedders running round in a circle. He just did it, right? And the minute he said why he was doing it, we burst out laughing. There would have been no daily orders that would have prevented us from doing that. And the same as you're stuck in a trench and there's a load of fire coming in at you, you're coming under attack. Again, it's like you keep your head down and you probably end up giggling. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no, like I say, there's no daily orders that's going to stop you from doing that. It is a coping mechanism, absolutely,
Yeah,
for
humor in
sure.
the face of adversity. I think that's one of the kind of British Army's traits, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Well, I think Blackadder in the First World War was a great example of that, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that I think that nailed it. That kind of whole Blackadder thing nailed the humour with the British kind of Ruperts and the squaddies and that sort of thing. And you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
almost imagine it. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to be faced with what they were faced with, but
Oof,
you can almost imagine the
imagine.
humour, can't you?
100%. But they had nothing else. Living in them rat-infested trenches and God knows what else. That you're definitely going to laugh or cry at that point. And I'm
Yeah,
watching that. We just started watching that SAS Rogue Heroes. I don't know if
I've
you've
just
seen it
finished
yet.
it. I've just finished it.
Are you season one? Or
Both
you got?
seasons. I've done them both.
I did season one, and last night we started season two, and it's like you can imagine them boys in the Second World War. I mean, that they were just relentlessly scrapping, weren't they? So you know,
Well, I said before, that kind of specialist reconnaissance or raiding
raiding
squadron
service. Yeah,
or
whatever.
whatever they call. So I had a guy on from the Chelsea Pensionist Care Home who was 102, and he was one of the founding members of
Oh
the
right.
raid. So I chatted to him, and he was dead blasé about. He was like, "Oh yeah, we went into Sicily and we kicked the Germans out of there." And it was just that, and what he meant by that was heavily fighting against the Germans in
Yeah,
Sicily
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
Italians and stuff. And you're just like dead blasé about it.
No,
What a
no.
guy. But
Yeah,
um,
amazing.
what I wanted to ask you as well, I saw it on another podcast, one you've done, well, I think quite recently, when you was asked what's the most, because obviously you were responsible as organising artists and sort of getting acts on. So what is the kind of, I know the answer, but for the audience, what was the most you've kind of a DJ that you've been responsible for kind of getting on for a show or in a club has paid it, for a fee?
Yeah, I mean, the most expensive, several DJs. I paid David Guetta $250,000. I paid Avicii $250,000. Played Calvin 200,000. All them DJs went on to make 500,000, 400,000. I'm going back to when I last booked David and Avicii, was probably 10 years ago. And already they were on 200,000, 250,000 plus for a 2 hour set. So, but, I think it is a very, very strange lifestyle. When you, as a DJ, I mean, somebody like David's probably doing, I mean, in his heyday, until he's obviously wealthy enough now where he can pick and choose his gigs, but probably in his heyday, he was probably doing 4 or 5 shows a week, and most of them would be in a different country. So you imagine catching 4 or 5 long haul flights every week, queuing at airports, time zones like through the roof, not knowing whether you're on that time zone or that one. He actually told me one day he spends most of his time in his own time zone. He just sleeps when he's tired and he wakes up and eats when he's hungry, and because otherwise he just can't keep up with it. You can't, if you're flying from South Africa up to Europe and then across to New York and then down to Brazil and then back to Europe, and all in a week or whatever, or in 10 days. You don't even have time to catch up on jet lag or whatever. So it's I don't think it's a particularly very healthy lifestyle, to be honest.
No, well, again, it's got the glitz and glamour, and everyone will see
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But what they don't get is what you've just said there: the travel aspect, the
yeah,
planning. They still have to practice. They still have to turn up and rehearse. It's
yeah.
not like they turn up, 10 minutes before, jump on, do the 2 hour set, and then go and have a few beers. It's
No, and they're
it's how
making
it is.
music. They're making music. I mean, all these guys are also pop stars. I mean, Davies probably had 40, top 20 hits. Calvin Harris has had at least 2 or 3 albums worth of big hits, as well. I mean, one time David showed me his calendar for the year. So this is, I think probably we sat down in January to talk about his residency with me in Ibiza. He used to do about 18 shows for me in Ibiza. I mean, looks in January, his calendar is full virtually every day for the whole year. But there's things in there like dental appointment, at that point, going to the daughter's school for a school interview, press conference, and this and that. And it's all in there already. And I don't know if I'd like my life to be that structured. Looking at that thing for the whole year and go, my God, I've got to do all of that, and it's all there and there's no getting out of it. It's like it's got to be done. So, yeah,
Well,
it's a
maybe
weird
it's
one.
short. It's like maybe it was like short-term sort of sacrifice for. I mean, and now you look at the positions they're in. It may have been I dare say probably worth it when he looks at look at the bank balance.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's totally. But it's like with you, right? And the same with me. When you're a fireman, you're going to go to work every day. You're going to go to work, but you don't know what you're going to do when you get there.
yeah,
Every day can be different completely. When he looks at his calendar, he actually knows exactly what he's going to be doing all the time, and I'd find that a bit like really hard work. Looking at that and thinking, okay, it's all plotted out for me completely. But you're
yeah,
right.
and
I mean, they're making their money, so it
yeah,
is
I
what it is.
suppose the weird bit is there's like you said, because when you're military and when you're fire service, there is structure because
Yeah,
you start the day is mapped out. You've got things to do and there are routines, but at the same time, it's completely unstructured as well. So
absolutely.
it's a bit of both, isn't it? And I think
100%.
I like the idea. Every job I've ever done, from working close protection in Iraq to kind of working, in the fire service from the military, has had a structure, but it's also got that element of is different every day as well.
Yeah.
If that does that make sense? Do you know what I
No,
mean?
100% makes sense. And I much prefer that. I much prefer knowing, okay, I've got to go to do a night shift for 16 hours, but I don't know what's going to happen in them 16 hours, and anything can happen. You might even die yourself. You know what I mean? You might be trapped in a fire. You might crash the wagon. Anything can happen. And I kind of like that. I do like that, I must admit. But you're right, it's a structure with actually no structure.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm conscious that we've been on like 50 minutes now, but I'd like to ask you, because you'll have more stories, I'm sure. Can you pick out any memorable moments over the years that you've been doing what you've done, or artists that you've worked with, have been standout artists where you've thought, wow, you are a master of your craft? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You know what? I think probably one of my best times was in the Navy, was coming home from the Falklands, when the ship came alongside. We'd stayed out in the Channel overnight, did an up Channel night, which was sort of everybody getting drunk basically on board ship before they go in the next day. And seeing my mum and my dad and my sister and my girlfriend all waiting for us, like, 50,000 people welcoming this ship home, having been away for, I don't know, 6 months, and at least four of them not knowing when we were coming home or if we were coming home. So that was such an amazing experience to get home like that. I suppose in the fire brigade, one of my biggest memories was on Christmas morning, being a fellow firefighter called David Clough went into a house fire in breathing apparatus and rescued this young girl at 5 in the morning who fell asleep smoking in bed. Her boyfriend had got up to go to work, and she'd woke up with him and decided to have a cigarette and set fire to the place. We pulled her out. I got her downstairs onto the lawn, and we went back in to look for anybody else. And she was dead. I mean, she felt dead to me when we were carrying her downstairs. That weight was the wrong kind of weight. And then when we got back downstairs, she was throwing up on the grass, and you know, we come within minutes of losing her. That's for sure. And that's such an amazing feeling when you know that you really have just saved somebody's life, 100%. And that sort of rings true. And then I think with the music industry, I mean, Bondi Beach, Sydney with Carl Cox was an amazing event, absolutely incredible. I also did a big event in Pacha, and I got a phone call from U2's management. It was the Edge's 40th birthday, and they were in Barcelona. They'd just done a big gig, and they said, "Look, we a surprise. We're going to fly over from Barcelona with the whole band, and we'd like to come to Pacha and book the terrace. They knew the terrace they wanted in front of the bunker room. We want to book that terrace for the band for the Edge's birthday. Will you reserve it for us?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, it's done. Don't worry." He said, "Okay, will you meet us outside? And how can we get in without there being a big fuss? Because there's always a big queue outside or whatever." And I said, "Oh, come down the side. We've got a restaurant down the side. I'll wait there for you, and I'll bring you in." And anyway, this coach pulled up, and I thought, okay, it's going to be Bono and the Edge and the band and whatever. And the doors opened, and it was Helena Christensen, Kylie Minogue. I mean, all
No
these
way.
mega fit women, yeah, yeah. And at the time, Helena Christensen for me was like the best looking woman on the planet. Oh, these doors opened, and all these women came out, and then the whole band came out, and they all stood around like school kids, going, "Well, where are we going down?" I said, "I'll follow me." So we went upstairs. I got them into their area, like perfectly. And the manager, came straight over to me and he gave me an American Express, and he went, "Right, whatever we use tonight, take it off there and put 10,000 euro tip." And that was it. And it's just really, and they had the most amazing night. It was such really good fun, but really down to earth, proper guys. I mean, funnily enough, we did the same. We had a similar thing with P Diddy. He came
Right.
along. He had a VIP table. He spent 70 grand on the VIP table and just walked out, thinking he didn't have to pay it. So he went back to his super yacht, and then next day he rung up, I want to book a table to come and see David Guetta. I said, "Well, if you come and pay for the table from last night first, then you can book a table." "Oh, well, in America, we don't have to pay these things. Our superstars are invited." And we're like, "Well, you're not in America now, mate." So he came over, and there's the difference between somebody like U2 and somebody like P Diddy. U2 went, "There's the card and take a big tip," and P Diddy was like, "I ain't paying," but he paid. He had to pay in the end. So
Almost like
yeah.
privileged and a bit arrogant with it.
I think there's that Americanism with it as well, where maybe the clubs in America likes that thing. They want a big superstar. But in Pacha, to be honest, everybody from Mick Jagger down came to Pacha all the time. And they all paid. They all loved it. They all, they got left alone. our security make sure that they could party themselves in the VIP area there, and they felt very comfortable there. And everybody's been there, and all the big stars have been there. So it was for us, it's normal. It wasn't if a big star thought they could come and just not pay, then they weren't welcome. To be honest, it was. I mean, we had one guy, big Arab sheikh, came, and it was his birthday, and he had this entourage, and he was dropping, probably spent about 150 grand that night on his table. And he found out that the waiter serving him, it was her birthday as well, and he sent one of his lackeys back to the super yacht. Came back with a Cartier watch and a diamond ring as a present. He'd obviously got pre-packed gifts on the boat for people he met, and he gave it to her. And I heard she sold it and bought an apartment with it. So it's that kind of shit going on.
It certainly beats the selection box for Christmas, doesn't it? You know what I mean? But I tell you what, no, them experiences are just like I say, going from the elation of coming home from the Falklands to saving someone's life to a house fire to meeting, celebrities on like A-list kind of sort of level, Is there any that you've been, and the reason I ask this is like, I've been doing a podcast sort of since February, as I kind of said, and I've had some guests on, some big guests, some small guests. I got a bit starstruck with Gary Stretch that was in a film that called Dead Man's Shoes. He was a former boxer. I'm big into my boxing. I was a bit stuck. But I actually, before I went to work last night, I've been in touch with Sugar Shane Mosley. I don't know if you know much about boxing. 7-time world champion. He's like the Cristiano Ronaldo of the boxing kind of world. He's like a legend. Floyd Mayweather, and he rang me last night on WhatsApp, and I'm not often starstruck, but I was a bit like trying to hide my excitement on the phone when I was talking to him, when I was trying to get him on the podcast. So he's on next week. But yeah, is there any celebrities that you've kind of met along the way where you've been a bit like, holy crap, you know what I mean?
Well, I was like that when the girls, Kylie Minogue and Helena Christensen and all these beautiful supermodels, Naomi Campbell, all these piled up this coach in front of U2. I was prepared to meet U2, which is pretty big in any way. But I got caught so off guard when Naomi Campbell and Helena Christensen and Kylie Minogue and all these came piled up. Where's Bono? I didn't even know what to say to them, you know what I mean? They were all absolutely stunning and just, but that was quite a shock to the system. I thought it was just going to be like 5 area-horsed Irishmen jumping off the coach,
Yeah, I can imagine that. Like you say, you mentally prepared yourself for meeting U2, which is a big deal. And then you kind of met with these like supermodels and pop stars and stuff. It's a bit like, whoa. But no, fair play to you, fair play to you. So yeah, wrapping it up, pal, what are you kind of on with now? What you've got immediately lined up, and what are you kind of working on or working as now? What are you doing right now?
Well, I'm working now on my music conference, which happens at the end of April. I'm working with the Adapted Grand Slam veterans again. They're coming back over to hang out for a week, and we're booking all the shows that go on around that. Not lots of events. The music conference itself is a 3-day event with lots of panels and workshops and technology and all the rest of it. So we're working getting that together. And then I'm booking probably about 400 DJs for this summer. So if you think there's three DJs a night for about 160 nights, they've all got to be booked and their deals done, and then around that goes their marketing and their logistics, their flights, their hotels, everything. I have a logistics girl that does all that for me, but the deal has to include all of that. So we're just going through all them deals now. And then, I mean, now is the busy time for me, really. Once I get into summer, everything's been booked and programmed. It's then you sort of have to sit back and let it happen. The decisions that are made between November and the end of February are the decisions that are going to tell you whether you're going to have a big summer or not. If you make the bad decisions and the club's not busy, that was a bad time. If you make the right decisions and your club, I mean, in PACHA, when I started in PACHA in 2000, they were grossing about 9 million. And by the time I left, we were grossing about 38 million. So the
Wow.
growth over those, 12 years or so was crazy. And now there's places in Ibiza, Ushuaia, and they're making 100 million in 4 or 5 months. It's a big, it's a big industry now, very big industry.
Yeah, well, the kind of you were lucky enough to be out there as well. But it's obviously it's still massive, but the golden era of the kind of club scene in Ibiza would have been sort of mid to late '90s and early 2000s. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I think it was. I mean, there's an element of the fact we were just younger then as well, so it always feels better when you're younger, you know.
True.
But as a business for me, I'm kind of happy that I was in at the beginning, and I'm still in it now. And over 30 years of being in it, I've watched the business evolve from being illegal raves and cowboys into a massive $12 billion a year industry that you know, is extremely well run and very professional. I'm happy. I mean, if you think about it now, electronic music is probably 40 years old. I don't think rock music lasted that long. You know what I mean? I think most of the music you hear now on the radio and on, if the, you know, if you like the top 20 or whatever, it's mostly electronic created music. Rock bands have disappeared. I saw a chart the other day actually that was quite astounding. I think in the 90s there was something like 100 bands in the charts or over the year. And then in 2000s it went down to about 60 something. And I think over the last 10 years there's about 10 bands. The rest is like pop stars, you know, or boy bands or girls or guys or whatever, or, you know, producers basically. It's changed completely.
Yeah, it sounds like, well, like I say, you've been in it for such a long time, and you've kind of seen it evolve and stuff. That must be like weird, but also kind of really, really nice as well. And you don't, to me, it didn't strike me as any signs of slowing down. So fair play to you. Um, well, I
Yeah.
say that. I don't know. I don't know how you feel, but I mean, 30 years of like partying. I suppose you get roped into partying as well, don't you? With kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, you know, it's unavoidable. I mean, you know, I go to the club probably 3, 4 nights a week. I stay in for a couple of hours. I have a couple of shots. Sometimes I put some apple juice in the DJ booze. So when everybody else is having a shot of tequila, I'll fill a shot glass with apple juice and it looks like tequila. But I walk home and I'm completely sober, you know, I'll go out to my car. But it looks like I'm involved in the party. So, and I'm the master of the French exit. You know, I never say goodbye to anybody when I leave a party or an event. I just go. You know, you know, and it's funny because I always thought the French exit was because we always considered them being, you know, waving the white flag or running away from the battle, if you like. And it actually wasn't. It's nothing to do with that. It's actually being polite, where you don't want people to think the party is ending. You know, people are starting to leave, so you sneak away, and then people that are still there think everybody's still there, right? We just can't see them. So, yeah, I'm a master of that.
But
Forget the
also, it's a
toilet, guys.
nightmare.
You know,
It's a
go on.
nightmare though as well, isn't it? Making your way around everyone to say Tyrion, and then you'll always get people go, "Oh no, don't stay for one more drink," and you're
Yeah.
like, "Well, I just want to." And sometimes it's just easy just to slope off out the side door. No one knows. Jobs are good, isn't it?
No, mate. I mean, it take me an hour to leave a nightclub sometimes, especially when I work there. You know, and if I say goodbye to everybody, I'll be there all night. You know, so no, I stick out. Yeah.
No, fair play. Well, like it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. What a varied career, pal. And I must say, hats off. Hats off for what you do for kind of adaptive Grand Slam and for the veterans again. Something that I kind of I'd like to be involved in the future. Like I say, I'm raising awareness for veterans. It's something that's close to my heart. So hats off for that. And yeah, like what an outstanding career, pal. And I'm glad it's working out for you. And what a success story as well. You know, I think there'll be loads of people watching this. Certainly, guys of my age and younger guys as well, going, "Fucking hell, you've got a life out there." You know, you're in a sunny climate and you're on the club scene. I don't see how it can get much better, to be honest.
No, not bad. I mean, not bad for a kid who joined the Navy in '79 because he couldn't get a job in his own town. So, yeah.
Well, there you go. But no, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for taking time to come on and appreciate it. And you enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thank you very much.
Cheers, pal. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.